bank profits are under the spotlight, especially after the Reserve Bank pointed out they have been quick to raise interest rates for lending and slow on raising them for deposits. The Reserve Bank has said banking would be an appropriate focus for a market study, similar to what we've seen for supermarkets. But where that could be a long drawn-out process, National has called for a short, sharp select committee inquiry. ACT leader David Seymour and Green MP Chlöe Swarbrick join us this morning for more on this. Thank you both. Now, Grant Robertson has said in response to National's call that that kind of approach would be quick and dirty and not appropriate here. David, what do you say to that?
Well, I was quite astonished. I mean, first of all, let me stick up for the 6 Labor MPs on the committee who Grant Robertson says aren't up to it. But there's a more serious point here that, you know, people elect a parliament. That's what a democracy is all about. Grant Robertson saying the people you elect are not up to it, and some consultants and bureaucrats somewhere will do a better job. The difference is that they're not accountable. They don't have to go back to their community and actually talk to the people. So it's very anti-democratic. But, you know, the really important thing here is how do we make sure that life becomes more affordable? And I think there are really serious questions around the number of hoops that banks have been made to jump through. You just look at the triple CFA, you try and get a credit card and they're obliged to ask you how much you spend on cat food. All of that stuff stacks up and it makes life more affordable. It also stops new banking services from entering the market, because if there's too much profit being made, what usually happens is people say, well, gee, I'd like a bit of that, come in, compete, lower prices, and everyone gets a better deal. So there's lots of good questions to be asked, and I think Parliament, since we're all paying for it, and since those are the actual elected representatives should be allowed to do it, Grant Robertson's just playing for time, and there's an anti-democratic part in there too that I don't like.
Well, yeah, so everybody seems to be in agreement that there should be some kind of inquiry, but Chloe, you have been blocked before in trying to get a select committee inquiry into the economic response to COVID. So how optimistic are you that this would actually get across the line?
Yeah, well, morena. I got to say, based on the comments that we heard yesterday, that I'm not particularly optimistic that we're going to be able to get it through at a parliamentary level. Again, a week is a long time in politics, and we're hoping that things will change as we head into the next sitting week next week. But I think if we zoom out here and we look at the problems, the things that we actually already do know that we don't need an inquiry to tell us. The bank's made $6 billion in profits after tax at our current tax rates last year. That's $180 a second, at a point in time when so many New Zealanders are struggling. And that's why the Greens have said very clearly and very freely that that money actually hasn't been made by virtue of any specific hard work, any novel enterprise, any of that investment that David's been talking about. We're lagging colossally behind the OECD when it comes to open banking. But so you can have an excess profits tax here. Well, currently, again, based on the way that we have operated in the past, we have precisely done that. And that's the point, actually, that RBNZ, Adrian Orr, has been making, is that banks currently operate in a way where they privatise profit and they socialise cost. And that, frankly, is unfair and inequitable.
You know, Chloe, no bank has been bailed out in your lifetime. And the last one was BNZ in the early 1990s. And that was a government-owned bank that made big mistakes, in part because of political interference.
Once again, we have a status quo which is deeply unfair. Our banks are profiting at a point in time where they have been handed deeply unfair, fortuitous economic circumstances, and they should be paying their way and contributing to this country, where they're extracting, on average, 20% more per New Zealand consumers than they are out of Australian consumers. A large reason for that is that in 2018 there was an Australian inquiry into the banks.
Chloe, is there a level of profitability that is acceptable? Because the banks have indicated that they're only getting a 13% return on capital. What percentage is acceptable?
Yeah, so I heard that point from Ryan this morning. It's important to note that that figure actually comes from 2019, so outside of the window of what we're talking about here, which is these excess windfall profits made in the context of COVID-19 and an over-reliance on unconventional monetary policy where there's a huge amount of liquidity in the market. So to the point, absolutely, excess windfall profits taxes should be one-off by their nature, and there's 2 different ways that you can look to apply them. You can do it by virtue of what's called the average earnings method, which is comparing periods of time, or you can do it by virtue of the invested capital method. So those are 2
every single dollar that's taxed will be paid for by their customers. That's where all of a bank's money ultimately comes from.
That is the risk.
So more taxes on banks and more risk that random taxes will be introduced if they do too well is only going to make the cost of living worse. We're here to make life more affordable. We're here to take away barriers and increase competition. If Chlöe wants to threaten banks with extra taxes, then they're going to say, well, one year we might make a loss and we're not going to get bailed out because that hasn't happened for over 30 years. Therefore, they're going to actually charge people even more. You know, it's just the same as how taxing landlords was going to help tenants. Actually, people are paying more in rent now because landlords face more taxes. More taxes do not make life more affordable, in fact the opposite, and that's why we should be looking to reduce government waste rather than try and find ways to take people's money at every opportunity.
I just want to move this on very quickly because there will be more discussion about this banking inquiry, I'm sure, but David, I want to come to you on charter schools. You've been meeting with some schools this week that were formerly charter schools converted to special character schools. What was their message to you this week?
Well, it was a wonderful week. I mean, I was involved at the very beginning in 2012 getting the charter school model set up. They operated, 11 of them opened. Labor closed them and allowed them to continue as state schools. I saw that the spark is still there. They're engaging kids who are often disengaged, often Māori, often Pacific, often kids with special learning needs, kids who are from very poor households. Kids who hadn't been going to school got re-engaged in charters. So it's a wonderful story that should be told more.
Chlöe, do you see this as a good alternative to be able to give, you know, students who do learn in different ways the option of charter schools?
I think, as David's just himself elucidated there, that within the special character model, we are seeing that these services are being delivered.
Well, actually, let me answer the second part of the
David,
question,
please,
because
if I can finish.
having visited, I've visited 8 of them in the last week, and what I'll tell you is that the special character model, first of all, doesn't require that they report on the outcomes. That's really important. We do too much micromanagement of schools. We don't ask about the outcomes. Second of all, the amount of bureaucracy they face is gradually beating them down, and they would actually like the charter model and their freedom back.
We're running out of time, but just a quick response from you, Chlöe.
If I can say, we have seen over the past 40 years that the general trajectory of successive governments has been to starve our public good, our public services, our collective well-being, like our schools, like our health system, to increasingly see it be privatised, and then to effectively blame that model for the way that things are playing out and that we're getting inequitable outcomes. We can get far better outcomes from our public education system if we're to resource it properly.
Okay, 8:23. ACT Leader David Seymour and Green MP Chlöe Swarbrick. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I do just want to, before we go to the break, pick up on something that Chlöe said. Chlöe, you said that the 13% figure I was using was from 2019, which is absolutely true, as I said earlier in the program, and that now there are windfall profits that are being made. Do you know what the return on equity is for that very bank, the ANZ, for, say, the last quarter of last year?
I don't have those figures off the top of my head.
It was actually 12.1%, so it's actually less than it was in 2019. So where are these windfall profits?
These windfall profits are in the form of the $6 billion after tax that they are making in the context of a cost of living crisis where everyday New Zealanders are struggling to get by.
Do you think that that tax, whatever it is that you want to apply, should apply to any industry that is making a return on equity more than 12%? Is that where you draw the line?
Good question. So what we've seen in the past has been targeting of specific industries, and particularly those industries that are driving inflation. Here in Aotearoa, they could look like the grocery sector, the gentailers and energy, those who are providing building supplies, for example. Look, again, well, actually, you'll see, David, that in very conservative governments, the likes of the Tories in the UK, that they have also just instituted a windfall tax on their energy retailers.
This is like Donald Trump. Populism, go after people. It all sounds good, but when you dig into the details, it's destructive to the...
Sorry, I've opened a can of worms.
I think one of us is definitely far more aligned to Donald Trump, David.
I've opened a can of worms I didn't mean to open. We have to go to a break.
It's exactly the same style of politics.
I'm being yelled at, sorry. Nice to see you both. It is 8:25. We'll be back talking surf lifesaving in just a moment.